I am calling the Tuesday, May 13th Planning Board, Currituck Planning Board meeting to order. At this time, let's stand for the Pledge of Allegiance and a moment of silence. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Okay, does anybody need to be disqualified from any of the new business? Okay, all right, I didn't think so. We do have a quorum. And at this time, I am going to entertain motions to approve tonight's agenda.
So moved.
We have a motion. Do I hear a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed likewise. Number 5, we're gonna approval of the minutes for our April 8th meeting. At this time, if y'all have had a chance to look at it, it was a very short meeting, so there shouldn't be but so much to review. But at this time, I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes from our April the 8th meeting.
I'll make a motion.
We have a motion. Do I hear a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, likewise. All right. No old business. Moving on to new business. Okay. Planning Board 25-07, Currituck County, request to amend the Unified Development Ordinance, Section 5.6.10, sidewalks and pedestrian circulation, to clarify that sidewalks are required on both sides of new streets and to require an easement in lieu of sidewalk construction for development adjacent to planned sidewalks. At this time, we'll hear from staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This text amendment was directed by the Board of Commissioners. Staff did receive feedback from the board at their February 26th work session. The board directed staff to amend the ordinance to only require sidewalks on new streets for major subdivisions. But then there was a little bit of discussion about having a plan in place and getting easements where needed for future construction of sidewalks. So there's some language in the ordinance as well about requiring easements along areas where there are plans that identify public sidewalk or side path improvements. So just getting to the language here in Chapter 5, which is the Development Standards chapter of the ordinance, and it's 5.6.10 sidewalks and pedestrian circulation. We're proposing new language regarding applicability that, except as otherwise provided in the section, sidewalks shall be required along new streets. And then number 2 here is related to requiring an easement adjacent to the right-of-way for future public sidewalk construction. And there's also a little bit of flexibility for the easement width to be reduced at the discretion of the director. There could be situations where the existing right-of-way is plenty wide, or let's say the road itself within the right-of-way, it's obvious there's going to be plenty of room to put the sidewalk in the right-of-way and not encumber the property with the easement along the front. So just giving a little bit of discretion for cases where that 15-foot easement might pose a problem to the adjacent owner. Then we just have more clarifying language here in number 2. Generally, I'll just state that we know, right, like we're just looking at anything that's not underlined or strike-through language here is existing language in the ordinance that we're not changing. So we're going to add that sidewalks shall be required on both sides of all new streets, which is that new language, in major subdivisions, and then there's some exceptions for when sidewalks are not required that we're not changing. And then in looking at the ordinance, there was a statement in F that talks about in cases where environmental or topographic conditions make sidewalk installation prohibitive and no practical alternative is available. We're adding also existing conditions because there could be some existing condition that would make it not practicable. So, and that also is going to have some discretion of the director. And then lastly, number 5 under configuration talks about new non-residential mixed-use and multifamily development shall provide at least one on-site improved connection between the development and an existing adjacent public sidewalk system. You can see that new language is just requiring it between the new development and an existing sidewalk, not a planned sidewalk. This is maps that I thought you may find interesting. I know it's kind of small here, but just generally the dark blue is where there's proposed side path trail, and you can see that's on your major corridor. The kind of Carolina blue or light blue there is, for any Duke fans, is proposed sidewalk along Tulls Creek Road. Let's see. So that's just kind of showing you a plan that's been adopted by the county from the Connect Currituck plan and where the sidewalks are. So where these provisions will apply to existing development adjacent to these areas, and where we'll be looking for potentially an easement adjacent to the road.
Any questions for staff? I have one. What do you consider a major subdivision?
Major subdivision is anything that's not a minor, family, or no review subdivision. So typically speaking, it can be more than 3 lots.
Oh, okay.
It's a subdivision that has a road built to NCDOT standards.
Okay.
So it kind of varies. But typically, major subdivisions are more than 5 or 6 lots.
Right. Right.
So, and in this particular instance, when you go back to the exceptions, it talks about in subdivisions of 5 or fewer lots, no sidewalks are required.
Okay. Now, how about subdivisions that are 10-acre lots where there may be?
That's a no review subdivision, so that's not considered a major.
At all.
That's
They're
correct.
exempt
Regardless of
subdivisions.
how many lots there are, if
Right.
it's 10 acres, then they're exempt from pretty much.
And they're not even putting in a street. That's part of the requirements, that they can't put in like a dedicated right of way,
Okay. Because
And
a
meet
few
the
of those
exception.
are popping up here and there. Yeah.
right?
Okay.
Question. In the design of the sidewalks and the way they're designed, like we were kind of saying right before the meeting started, or I said, is there something that makes them design? Is there something written down that makes the engineers or the developers, whoever design it, to where the sidewalk is always on the owner's side of the ditch? Could they design it to where the sidewalk was on the street side of the ditch?
Right, so the easement language that we're asking for, do you mean in new subdivisions or along existing roads, or both?
Not like on some of the subdivisions in Moyoc that are currently there that have sidewalks there. Majority of them, if you drive through them and look, you'll have the road, you'll have the shoulder of the road, a ditch, and then the sidewalk is actually on the property owner's side of the ditch. Like, I know it may still be within whatever distance or wherever, but most developers are designing them on the other side of that ditch, up in those people's front yards a little bit. Is there anything that says it has to be there, or could a developer design it to where the sidewalk was on the shoulder side of the ditch? If you
Right,
make
so-
sense what I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean, yes, they can potentially do it either way. A lot of times those sidewalks are in easements, pedestrian or sidewalk easements on the front of lots that are being created. And so that the developer doesn't elect to put the sidewalks adjacent to the road. I believe, is it DOT that would prefer it to?
For safety reasons, get the people away from the edge of the road in case a car came up on the edge. So you get
So
that
what are they-
buffer between.
So what do they say then about the main road, like the Kellogg sidewalk? I mean, that's along the.
Yeah, they're either, and they may have gotten some, I mean, they may have put some of the sidewalk in the actual, in an easement along the highway.
Because I mean, like
Some have done that.
just using the Kellogg's one because it's the most recent one I know of, like along the highway. You know, that's within that 15-foot easement, I think. So, but in the development.
Well, it's either in the right of way or in an easement on their property.
Right.
But I'm not 100% sure what they ended up doing with that. I probably could find it though.
This is just using it as a reference.
I mean, that's more of a design standard that you're talking about,
Okay.
When does
than an
this,
ordinance requirement.
when does the sidewalk have to be placed? I know that you can have an easement. Is it for a C of O? Is it?
So
For
are
the-
you talking about for new subdivisions or for not, development along like the corridors?
So the development along the corridors and,
Right, so it would generally be before CO, but now we're saying you don't have to build the sidewalk, but the county would like to have an easement for future public sidewalk construction.
is there, so the developer isn't forced to put the sidewalk in, but the easement has to be there for future.
Yes.
Okay, and that would be for the owner of the property, like, it has to be in before they get the C of O, is that, I'm just trying to
Yes.
get that
Yeah, we want the
stage.
easement recorded. Generally, it would be recorded prior to CO.
Okay,
And they would know about it at a site plan approval, so it would be plenty of time to know to get the
Okay.
easement recorded.
Could I ask a question with that?
Sure.
I'm a little confused by that answer.
Okay.
Let's suppose a developer were doing 3 or more homes along the same side of the street. It used to be that the sidewalk had to be completed, if there were to be one, had to be completed even though, before a CO, even though there was still some very heavy traffic going to come over the sidewalk. And so I think if, I'm asking because
Yes.
I don't know, there was some allowance made so that it could be delayed to the last moment and then
Right.
concreted over.
So it's two different questions. We have subdivisions and development along the, like Currituck Highway, any of the corridors where, like you see on this map where there's proposed pedestrian pathways. What you're talking about is with subdivisions, there is the ability to provide a performance guarantee for certain site improvements that aren't in prior to final plat.
Okay.
And you can bond those for a certain amount of time. So that's probably what you're thinking about.
Yes, but again, to go back to the question, we're not likely to see a sidewalk in a subdivision with 3 spaces that someone's going to fill in. That's not going to happen. Is that the case?
What do you mean by that?
I think
So-
further to your question,
right. Actually, and I get what you're saying, it's the corridor and the business sidewalks for the highway businesses.
Or even if there was a subdivision adjacent to Currituck Highway, that
okay.
portion of the property adjacent to Currituck Highway wouldn't be required to put the sidewalk in, but we would want an easement for future installation of that public sidewalk. And that doesn't mean that the developer is gonna install it in the future. Part of, my understanding of part of the board's, desire to change this part of the ordinance is they felt like sidewalks were getting pieced in and it wasn't connecting to anything, and they felt like that things should go in and not as piecemealed and have like sidewalk connections and larger projects, and that the county might want to look at doing some of those projects as well. So having the easement gives us the ability to, put those sidewalks in at a later date.
One thing, when you think about it, I guess it's a concern, but something because you never know what will happen in the future. Basically, they're doing this because of they want more pedestrian traffic, along these sidewalks, as opposed to bicyclists running along the curb or walking right along the Tulls Creek Road, which is dangerous. I see it all the time. The problem you could have though is it's going to increase bicyclist and pedestrian traffic when you have sidewalks. So that may be a safety concern as well. So sometimes what you're trying to do for safety reasons may, in the long run, cause more issues. Because I know sometimes in some areas, when you're trying to back out, like in certain parts down in the Outer Banks, like South Nags Head, they have wide sidewalks. And when you try to get out on Old Oregon Inlet Road, you have to really look. Not only do you have to look at Old Oregon Inlet Road, you've got to look at that big wide sidewalk because you've got golf carts, you've got bicyclists, you've got things coming. So you really are having to deal with two traffic flows at that time. And that's the only, I just want to make sure when we think it through that we're like, okay, yeah, we're trying to solve a problem for safety, but could it really lead to more issues with pedestrian traffic down the road? Because once people feel, the bicyclists, they'll go right along the side of a road and a ditch is right there, the road's here. I don't understand it, but they do. And now with a sidewalk, you're going to have even more pedestrian traffic.
Well, so just to be clear, this is taking the language that is requiring them to put in, the developer to put in that sidewalk, like Kellogg's.
Right.
And taking that language out, so they're not required to put in the sidewalk, but we have the ability to put it in if we need more space that the
Okay.
right-of-way allows in the future
Okay.
to put it in. So that's what this is doing. It's codifying that that sidewalk installation is no longer required.
I just think of a sidewalk down Tulls Creek Road. Oh, boy.
Are there different standards for residential sidewalks and the sidewalks along the corridor?
Right, so the per the plan, generally the side paths along the corridor are about 10 feet wide. They're
That's wide.
wider. Residential sidewalks are 5 feet
Yeah,
on
10 feet, that's
each.
wide.
On each, see right here, sidewalks are ADA accessible at least 5 feet in width. So that's generally what you're gonna see in subdivisions.
Right.
And then down below that, there's pedestrian street crossings and crosswalks, which that's kind of a separate category, I guess. Would be separate from the sidewalk with a 10-foot and a 6-foot width on those, so that,
The striping across streets and,
Right.
yeah, yep.
If a street is wide enough, they're still gonna require those sidewalks, even though some streets are fairly wide in some of our subdivisions.
Yeah, the sidewalks are currently required
Okay.
along all streets, both sides.
Yeah, because 10 feet, that's wide. That's
10 feet's only gonna be along your
Major
your
arterial.
major corridor. I do not believe even Tulls Creek Road would have a 10-foot side path.
wow.
Tulls Creek needs to just be wider for traffic.
Just widen the whole road.
So eventually, with the easements, typically what we would see is the taxpayers would be picking up those sidewalks if.
Right. So DOT has probably some plans at some point to do some highway changes and with that, put in some pedestrian pathways. Or the county, if we identified certain areas where we felt like it was a priority to get those paths in, like the Corolla Greenway, for instance. The county has done projects in the past.
I will say, when I go to Corolla and see the sidewalks everywhere, it feels like a healthier atmosphere to be outside. So I'm kind of torn with the cost, but I also see the health and the improvement in community as well.
Would you like me to go over the land use plan policies?
Sure.
I know you're familiar with these text amendment review standards of the ordinance that you can consider when deciding whether to recommend approval or denial of the text amendment or any changes. And in your staff report, there are some goals and policies of the plan that may apply to this request. That's going to be on page 7 of 11 of the staff report. There's land use policy 2.1, to continue to encourage businesses to coordinate site design with nearby businesses, including shared or connected parking and access, pedestrian and vehicular movement, and consistent signage. There's Parks and Rec Goal 2, to increase pedestrian and bike connectivity by expanding greenways, multi-use paths, and trails. There's Parks and Rec Policy 2.1, to continue to require new development to construct pedestrian walkways and multi-use greenways that connect to external, adjacent residential, commercial, recreation, and open space areas. There's Transportation Goal 2, to improve and expand pedestrian and bike facilities throughout the county. And Transportation Policy 2.1, that new developments shall construct pedestrian walkways and multi-use greenways that connect adjacent residential and commercial areas. So there's lots of policies in the county's adopted land use plan that support pedestrian connectivity. And the staff suggests potential consistency statement is that the amendment's in conformance with the UDO and it's consistent with the plan policy 2.1, land use policy 2.1.
I have another question. If a sidewalk is required on both sides, even though maybe there isn't subdivisions on both sides of the road, is it still required where there's just a green area, like where it may be just woods or something? Would that still be required if there aren't subdivisions on both sides?
You mean lots on both sides of the road?
Lots, yeah, I'm sorry, lots.
All right. Yeah, I mean, it talks about these are the times when sidewalks aren't required on both sides of new streets. In some instances, there may be a trail that could provide, and I think it has to be 8 feet wide. Here in E, I believe,
Oh, okay.
where a trail can provide equivalent level of pedestrian circulation to all lots in the subdivision. But I believe that's gonna have to be 8 feet wide, I thought. Right here. Pedestrian pathways, walkways, and trails shall be ADA accessible and at least 8 feet in width. So there have been some subdivisions that had a trail or a path in lieu of a sidewalk on both sides of the street.
On both sides?
Right, so.
Without concrete or
No, it
pavement?
has to be ADA accessible, so it has to
Okay.
be hard surface material.
Okay, that's what that means, okay.
Yeah. I'm looking here at the Connect Currituck plan, just about along where there's side paths and trails proposed here. The dark blue. Preferred width of a side path is 12 feet, minimum preferred width is 10 feet, and in constrained conditions, the absolute minimum width is 8 feet.
And along the corridor where there are not easements now, easements will have to be obtained?
Not necessarily. It's more of a planning, like, if we need the easement, we have it in place. Not knowing exactly how the road is even gonna be configured at the time when the paths go in. Just making sure that we have the ability to put the path in.
I have one. Will that also be applied to existing business, existing homes that are along 168 corridor? For the
Redevelopment
easement?
of,
We're just waiting for redevelopment or,
yeah, new development and redevelopment.
okay. Because it just seems we'd have a lot of kind of the sidewalk to nowhere. If it's,
That-
it would just seem it'd be like a sidewalk to nowhere where it's kind of spotty all the way down, because we don't have easement rights between.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to get too hung up on the easement language, and we can talk about whether the easement language makes sense or not. I mean, probably the majority of the time you can fit your sidewalk in the right of way that you have, especially when you're talking about the corridor of Currituck Highway. There could be some areas where the road tightens to one side or the other that might, which is why there's flexibility for the director to determine whether, maybe something less than 15 feet would make sense in certain situations. So I don't know that we need the the easements to do it, but I know when we did projects in Corolla and are looking at future projects in Corolla, and sometimes you do have to go out and try to get easements. So you may not need it for every property. It could just be certain properties that you need it for.
Okay.
All right, any more questions for staff? Okay, any discussion?
I'd like to make one point, if I may. A long, long time ago, I believe it was, it came before, I think, this committee about the possibility of a traffic light beside Town Bank of Moyock. Finally, that thing is there. And if it was, this committee had any part in that, I think they deserve a thorough pat in the back. On at least 2 occasions, Nightingale has pulled people off that intersection. And now we've got a situation where we've got a very, very busy DMV office, with a brand new 7-Eleven, and we've an area which is going to be inhabited by folks 55 years or older, all converging in one spot and facing dump trucks coming from a sand pit. Finally, we've got a traffic light, and so if the planning department or this committee had any part in that, thank you.
I think that was a long, long time ago in the,
Yeah. It took a long time to get it, but it's, hopefully it's going to be energized this coming week. It's a good thing.
I will say, off the record here, Puddin Ridge Road, really, people run that thing nonstop. Off. Okay, I'll get off that.
Okay, any further discussion? All right, hearing none, I am going to open the floor for a motion. And you have, everybody has their cheat sheets, I'm guessing, okay?
Move to approve PB 2507, Currituck County text amendment, because the request is in conformance with the general purpose and intent of the Unified Development Ordinance and is consistent with the goals, objectives, and policies of the Imagine Currituck 2040 Vision Plan, including Land Use Policy 2.1.
Okay, we have a motion on the table. Do I hear a second?
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed likewise. Motion passes. Okay, moving on.
Yep.
Number 2, discussion of future text amendments.
I'm just gonna put the review standards up because I'm just realizing I did not make the slide for that, that item here. So, yeah, I just wanted to just generally let the board know of some amendments that are gonna be coming through, in the next couple of months. One, the Board of Commissioners at their February work session directed staff to look at minor subdivisions and family subdivisions and look at some ways to allow additional, or not additional as necessarily, but there's provisions of the ordinance that currently require in the residential zoning district, SFM, single-family mainland, that in order to do a minor subdivision, you have to have water in that zoning district. So the board wants to look at allowing, minor subdivisions generally are less than 3 lots, or family subdivisions. Family subdivisions are already exempt from the water requirement. So you've got landowners that may want to create a lot or 2, not a large major subdivision. They don't have county water, and they can't do that currently in the residential zoning district. Also, in the agriculture zoning district, currently the ordinance requires for minor subdivisions a minimum lot area of 3 acres in order to do a minor if you're not on the county water. So the board want us to look at allowing 40,000 square foot lots in ag without county water as an option for minor subdivisions. So that's language that we're working on, and likely you will see that at the next planning board meeting. Staff's also looked at some of the legislative changes, and so there are multiple amendments to the ordinance that need to be addressed. And these aren't related to some of the other bills that you may have seen related to zoning authority. of local governments, but these are bills that have already been passed over the past year or two. There's a statement that, or a requirement that we can't exclude manufactured homes based on the age of the home, so we need to go in and revise some of our definitions for how we define manufactured homes. Parking spaces, there's a requirement that we can't require a parking space to be larger than 9 by 20. Now, that's something that we've already issued an interpretation to staff, so we're working within the state's requirement, but we need to amend our ordinance to reflect what the state requirement is. Then there have been some recent changes to bona fide farm and the definition of bona fide farms, so we'll need to amend the definition there. Just kind of get whetting your appetite, not giving you a ton of information, but just putting it on your radar. The state changed definitions of what can be included in lot coverage, like what you can require to be built upon area or lot coverage. So we are already implementing that change, again, through an interpretation, but we need to amend the ordinance to be consistent with the state regs on that. And that's pretty much it for now. But just wanted to get that on your radar. Those changes and possibly more will be coming to you over the next few months.
Okay, thank you. Any announcements? Anybody? Okay, hearing none. I am going to entertain a motion that we adjourn. We have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed likewise. Motion passes. Meeting adjourned.